It's a mediocre episode of Torchwood, but at least it's better than Cyberwoman. Welcome to the Time Treadmill. I'm Ron, and these are my sweaty thoughts about Doctor Who. It's at least somewhat ironic, after my previous episode of Sweaty Thoughts, that Small Worlds is the only episode of the first season of Torchwood that contains no profanity whatsoever. The story is inspired by the Cottingley fairy photos from the 1917-1918 time period, where two young girls took a series of 5 photographs, over the course of several years, but took several photographs of fairies in their gardens. And at the time, they became celebrities because Sir Arthur Conan Doyle saw the photos and believed they were real and spread them far and wide, and so they became very notorious. Of course, a great many people at the time correctly believed that they were fakes. And the two girls maintained their reality for several decades until finally, I think somewhere in the 1980s, one of them finally admitted that the fairies were just cardboard cutouts from a children's picture book at the time. And I've actually seen side-by-side comparisons of the fairies in the photos with picture book illustrations from a particular book from that time. But that's neither here nor there. That story was the inspiration for this episode of Torchwood, and that is the kernel of a good idea. And there's actually a pretty good concept going on here, and this story is noteworthy for several things. It's the first episode of Torchwood to show any of Jack's history. It shows as far back to 1909 in Lahore with Jack, which means that he's been rattling around on Earth for at least a century at this point, although they haven't revealed at what point in the past he was dumped off after the events of Parting of the Ways. The story also features an old woman who it turns out was Jack's girlfriend way back when, but he left her to go off to war. And then, for obvious reasons, he never contacted her again for several decades until he could pass himself off as his own son. So those bits are really interesting and a good bit of character development for Jack's history. As for the fairies themselves, there's a nice callback where Jack speculates that they might be in some way related to the Mara, which you'll remember is the creature from Kinda and Snake Dance, and I thought that was kind of a nice, obscure reference. And then finally, at the climax of the story, this features the first time where Jack makes a decision to resolve the story that is completely the opposite of anything the Doctor would ever have done. At the ultimate moment of the story, Jack essentially offers up the little girl to the fairies to let them take and make immortal in order to save the world from their fury. It's worth noting that this is not the last time that Jack will be willing to sacrifice a child in order to resolve a story. Beyond that, I guess Small Worlds just doesn't really resonate with me because it's full of unearned dramatic moments. It needs to rack up a body count, and so it introduces early on a pedophile who is justifiably killed by the fairies, and it introduces, if not an abusive stepfather, at least a disinterested, antagonistic stepfather who seems more interested in starting a new life with the young girl's mother than in embracing this young girl as his own daughter. And for that matter, the girl's own mother is portrayed as being not well engaged with her daughter, to the point where at the ending, when the girl is taken away forever by the fairies and the mother breaks down crying in agony, it just doesn't ring true. And I guess that just sums up the whole story for me. It's an interesting story concept with a couple of good plot points that needed at least one more rewrite to really stick the landing. What can you do? Now, the next story is the first one by Chris Chibnall that I actually like, except apparently a lot of people don't like it, but we'll get to that tomorrow. I'll see you then.